So yesterday I did a little intro video for this interview with Jim McDonald in my backyard, but today I was thinking, no, I want to do another one because I really want to hype you up for this conversation and the being that is Jim McDonald. So first of all, I'm at the Seattle Arboretum. My first day here, it's absolutely beautiful. Just finished a day of forest school. You can see the Oregon grapefruit blush and lipstick that I put on today and the adornment in my hair thanks to my students. Yeah, some of my love for this work actually has to do with Jim, so I wanted to take a couple minutes to introduce him, I feel like more properly, in first highlighting the kindness that exudes from Jim McDonald. I first learned about his work and his writing when I was at Prairie Warriors Herbal School in Kansas City with Kayla Rowan. We read a lot of his writing my first 3 years with Kayla because he has a lot out there, and he, just for free, you can check out his websites that I'll link below. And one thing that I was shocked in, not shocked, but like I love that he articulated so well in my call with him before our interview that he doesn't quite touch on in the conversation is that the need for kindness that's really making itself apparent these days, especially when it comes to herbal medicine and the way we treat each other. Not just treat each other day to day, but like actually hearing that herbalists refuse to treat a person because of a difference in ideologies. Like, oh, they don't deserve to be treated, or they don't deserve healing or wellness. And that's a really scary thought to me. And he does a good job of bringing it up in different terms in this conversation, and the need for more open-mindedness, more open hearts, which is a lot of what the first part of our conversation is about, and the traps in binary thinking that Jim does a really good job in the way he presents information and storytelling, so it doesn't seem as like such of a trap, as this is the right way and this is the wrong way. And Jim really helped me understand at the intersection of people and plants, the way that the tissues and the relaxation and the tension and the moisture and the dryness of the human body can interact with plants, and how it's never really a black and white thing. It's never really a right and wrong way of approaching plants, although that is included in nature. Nature includes but is not limited to the binary. So I think that's one really important thing that I want to mention before you get into this interview. Some other cool things that we talked about. I really didn't get into Solomon seal with him, although he was a teacher that really inspired me to work more with Solomon seal. I loved it before his class, but after my fascia class with Jim, I was like, oh, I love this plant and the medicine that it provides, not only I feel like the body, but our culture, the need for more moistening and flexibility in the tense, tight tendons and connection points of joints and intersectionality on the societal level that I think could be a good medicine for us at this day and age. I also finally asked Jim why he lowercases everything, and his answer really surprised me. So that's why you will see his name lowercase in all of my references when I share this interview out. And what else did I ask him about? Writing tips. He dropped such good wisdom, and I want to do a second interview where all we talk about is bitters, because I asked him about bitterness and why it impacts the emotional body and how bitters are related to our need for presence. And yeah, his answer there is really fascinating too. So I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it, and I hope that you get out in nature sometime and just put nature's ink on your face, because it tastes good, it feels good, and it's inspiring. So get in touch with Jim if you're interested in a more in-depth study on tissue states, and not just a clinical application for plants, because he's a teacher that on a plant walk he started talking about beaver sign and being able to see beaver sign through the plants. And I was like, oh, there's such a big, wider world to plants than just my clinical or culinary understanding, which is part of what led me to move to Duval and study at Wilderness Awareness School. So I hope you enjoy this, and please let me know if you have any questions about his program, because I really enjoyed it, even though it was a weird year. 2020, Zoom was not the best place to learn about herbs, but he still makes it work. He's a great storyteller. That's another big emphasis that we have in this conversation, and I'm rambling like a storyteller too here. But I just go back to the importance of stories and the need for more diversity and openness of hearing different stories, to stay in tune with the curiosity and of the plants that are around us. So keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, get outside, have fun, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Jim McDonald. Awesome. Well, today, for this episode of the Home for Humanity podcast, I have my teacher, Jim McDonald, and yeah, let's just jump into it, Jim. Why did I want to interview you for the Home for Humanity, this theme of discussions that I refuse to call a podcast, but it's a podcast. And it's this project of diving into humanity on all these levels and what it means to be home in this holistic view of not just a roof over our head, not just a place to put our head at night, but like the fullness of our humanity, what it means to be human. And plant connection and nature connection is a big piece of it for me. So that's why I brought you on. So welcome, Jim.
Yeah, nice to see you. I mean, because the last time that I spent a lot of time with you, we were all messed up.
Yeah.
Since 2020.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember that course. Wow, that was a lot to jump into and figure out on the fly. I remember there was a day that, because I told people like, oh, if you get tired of having your mask on, we were meeting outside under pavilion, you can just like step back and take your mask off and then come back close to everyone. And someone did that and they took their mask off. And I was like, oh, that is not what I expected the rest of their face to look like. Like, it was so surprising. Like, they fill in the gap and you're like, I was totally wrong.
And before that, we were meeting on Zoom, and that's like my least favorite format to learn about plants, but it worked. And so after we finally got to meet in person, and I made the road trip up from Kansas City to Michigan, which in and of itself was a funny thing. Like the whole plan for my whole apprenticeship with you didn't work out, but I still really loved going to Michigan and learning about plants in this new place, and hearing just like the immersion of your philosophy, like soaking in. And that's something I remember telling you on our prep phone call, like the intersection of plants and people, like the actions and the patterns of those things is something that I feel like you have a really good grasp on, just from, is it all of your experiments? I mean, have you just spent years experimenting and learning through experience?
That's actually a really pretty good way to look at it, because I think it's pretty accurate. When I first I've done different podcasts, everyone's like, how did you get started? So everyone's heard the story about like there was a purple book that someone left out and I started reading it. But I think the thing that was really distinct about it is I didn't start reading about herbs and go to the health food store or the food co-op and buy, pre-made bottles of stuff or pre-made bags of tea. I just sort of immediately, because at the time we lived on this old overgrown farm, I just immediately started going like, oh, I don't know what a lot of plants are, but I know that's a willow tree. And, I was passing by the botanical garden and I think that plant by the barn is a burdock. And I just started picking stuff and making things with it, making lots of teas of just everything and wrong things too. The first time we made willow bark tea, it was mostly the kind of spongy, mothy outer bark, because I didn't know about gathering the inner bark. And then, like who's willing to drink a tea that I make for them? Who's willing to I made something out of something in the backyard. Who's willing to try it? And it was like a small amount of friends of mine, and then my girlfriend at the time, wife now, was game to try stuff out. They felt safe that I wasn't going to poison them, which I maybe have kind of done a couple of times, but not in, well, I guess it wasn't the great way. They were a little bit poisoned. They're okay now. I guess that's what matters, right? They weren't dangerously poisoned. They were temporarily discomforted because I got like a dosage wrong, or I didn't understand some things that weren't like a great fit. I didn't know anything about this concept of energetics now. And that's the pattern. And when I teach now, and it really doesn't matter whether I'm teaching like an evening class, for a few hours to anyone that shows up, or the course that I do, or presenting at a library to teenagers or to gardeners. I want to teach about not just pieces of information, because I feel like we live in the time where lots of people have lots of pieces of information, right? And some people are able to hold tons of them in their head, more than I can. And other people, they have lots of them written down in pieces of papers and notes and highlighter and all of that. And that's really useful. It's important to know information, but if you know a lot of information, but you don't sort of get the gist of it, or you don't have like a framework to take that information and make it usable, it's less usable, or when you try to use it, it doesn't work the way you expected, because there's more than the tidbits of information. It's how things all fit together. And when, maybe in relation to the theme of this podcast, is when we think about using plants and using herbs and using mushrooms too, and other things that we have, and we have this framework. That framework is rooted in natural systems, and natural systems is what we all live in. Like we exist in natural systems, and using plants as medicine, and I would say actually using any kind of medicine, if you're doing it well, if you're practicing it well, is connected to like that idea that there are just things that make sense within a system and things that don't make sense within a system. And a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, you can use kind of common sense to figure things out. Some things are harder, some things are more complicated, some things are more abstract. But usually, if something makes absolutely no common sense, there's a reason for that, and it might not work.
It's interesting. Do you know about the 8 shields model, or I knew of someone who from your class that I had studied with, who, like, when I mentioned coming to Duval here in Wilderness Awareness School, they were like, like there's all these indicators of aliveness, but common sense is one of them. And being connected to that, whatever that is in our being.
There's even the philosophical concept of Occam's razor, that, like, usually the simplest explanation is the one that's correct, unless there's some reason to believe otherwise. If all things else being equal, if there's a whole bunch of different explanations, the simplest one is often the one that is actually true. And I found that to be the case. And, there's always exceptions. One of the things that I teach, and this is about herbs, I think this is about going through life too, is that we have these concepts of rules, and there are some rules or laws in science and reality, but there's also exceptions to those rules that you can explain, and then maybe like anomalies to those rules that you're just like, I can't explain why this doesn't work, but it's clear that it doesn't, so I'll just have to remember that. And that's really important, because in the English language that I'm speaking in right now, I can't write out the sound of like challah bread, and there's a whole huge part of the world where that's just the sound that people make. And in the English language, you can't write it. If you take the 12-tone musical system and you go to India and you listen to some of the music there, they have notes that you can't notate in that system. And it's not because they don't exist. It's just because any kind of system that we overlay on top of nature, we're just doing that because the totality of nature is too complicated for us to at least consistently comprehend. We occasionally will have these moments of inspiration or awe or wonder where we're like, oh, I get it. But I don't think anyone, whether they're enlightened or not, is in that state all the time. Which is just, I entirely get it. I've never seen anyone doing that. I don't think that that's even like a realistic thing to expect. I think what you try to do is you try to get closer to it. And one of the ways that I do that is knowing that, like, I've got a bunch of beliefs, and I can see why they make sense, but they're all up to revision at any point in time. Although I might be a little bit resentful about some of them if I like them a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like all models are wrong and some are useful.
Oh,
It's
yeah. You said that when we were talking before, and I need to like lock that into my brain to remember it to say it more often.
it's like one of the most freeing phrases, but also one of the most like rageful because it's like that sense of knowing is very comforting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think pre 2020, I could somewhat plan out my life. And like these days, I just do not have the same relationship to planning out my life as I did before that time because of the way that like my constructed view of the world really shifted. And I can't, I mean, when I moved up here from Missouri to Washington State, like some of the mentors that I had that I moved up here for in Wilderness Awareness School, I was like, I just want to know something. And then the more I clung on to that desire to know, I realized that like I was like getting closer to the unknown because it doesn't really work that way. And that's kind of what you're speaking to maybe. And that kind of relates to the binary thinking that we talked about. Like before I ever studied with you, I saw you said something on Facebook like, don't fall into binary thinking. It's a trap. And so maybe you want to get into that. Like what is the trap of this desire to know and what we think we know? Nature
Well,
includes, but is limited to the binary. It includes it, but like, is that
yeah,
related to?
a phrase I'll say is, well, first of all, it's a trap. Whenever anyone hears that, if you can have that in your head as Princess Leia saying it when they're trying to escape Cloud City, that's the way that it's a trap should sound in your head when you're hearing it. It's a trap. But yeah, nature includes, but is not limited to binaries. And so what I find is that people who are listening to this are you all come from all kinds of different backgrounds, and I know that some backgrounds binary thinking is not the only foundation of the way that you perceive the world, but for like larger Western culture here in let's say like North America and Northern Europe, those would be the cultures that I have some familiarity with. We're really taught this binary way is that there are things that are true and there are things that are not true. And if there's something that's true and something contradicts with that, then there must be a problem or it must be false, or you have to reconcile that. And that is an ineffectual way of thinking, and it will make living in the world harder because if contradictions invalidated things, then everything in nature would have a hard time existing because there's so many contradictions that are just inherent in nature, right?
Yeah.
If we instead think like, oh, there are things in nature that are binary, but a lot of things, and probably most things, are not binary. They're multidimensional, right? And that will stop us from trying to resolve problems that aren't binary by using binary thinking. And that's way easier said than accomplished. For example, like a great example, I think that probably everyone who's listening to this has been in a relationship, and one of the ways I think a lot of people are taught to resolve conflicts in a relationship is like, if I want something and then Sarah wants something, and those things are at odds, then we need to like compromise, right? Or I need to convince you of why my reasoning is more sound, or you need to convince me of why your reasoning is more sound. Kind of like they have debates, like you have a debate and each side is trying to show why their thinking is right, rather than like, oh, there's just different perspectives and people disagree. And maybe sometimes, every once in a while, someone will be like, oh, wow, your reasoning actually makes a lot more sense. And I see the flaws in my reasoning, and I'm going to change the way that I think to the way that you think. But more often it's the case like, yeah, sorry, that's not the way I see it. Me not agreeing or not changing my mind doesn't have to mean that someone else is wrong. It just means like we think differently. And when you have binary thinking, I think that there's this strong desire to sort of like sway people or convince people or get people to think the way that you do. And that's also not fun. Like, who wants to only be around people who think the same as they do?
I
You
think a
know,
lot of people.
I
I think a
know.
lot of I think it makes us feel safer, maybe. Maybe that's part of like the desire for security is that you can look
Mhm.
out and, you know, share space with like-minded individuals, and just the increased isolation and tribalism of like just allowing ourselves to separate each other. And I come across this mentality in housing too. Sometimes I'm like, well, maybe the intention of co-living and co-housing setups is just that the way, the reasons that you all come together, your intentions, maybe as long as they're similar, you can sort things out amongst yourselves. But then you will still in that system have to like allow differences,
Yeah.
in order for it to
Yeah.
succeed.
It seems like over time, the allowance for differences gets like narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower because even within people who would be like, let's say, socially, politically, ideologically, aligned on most things, a lot of people might get to a topic and it's like, wait a minute, no, that's not. There's a stance that we as people who think a certain way are supposed to think this way about all of these different things. And like, you got 90%, but that 10% is like, you're not supposed to vary there. You're not supposed to think that way about that thing because we're all supposed to think this way about that thing. And, one of the things that when I and you'll remember this when I have classes, when I do the course that I do, not just like the day classes, I talk to everyone for like a good 40 minutes or longer, and I kind of like go over what the course is about, and I tell everyone that so far I've never told anyone that they can't be in my course based on this short conversation, and I know people who will do that, and that's okay for other people to do things differently. But I think sometimes, like if there's someone who thinks very differently than what I expect, like the brunt of the group to think like, and they maybe have these strong feelings on a particularly charged topic that I can reasonably suspect is going to be challenging to other people in the course. I mean, one of the things I'm like is like, if you can think whatever you want, you can't not be kind to someone. That's like the rule of the class. Everyone has to be kind. But I've had people that are ideologically very different. And one of the things that I found is that if you get together and you're coming together about, let's say, the 90% of things or the 80 or 70% of the things that you do have mutual agreement and respect for, the 10% doesn't need to, or 20 or 30% doesn't need to derail the other stuff, which is what I think I see happening in the world a whole lot, is that people who agree on most things, there's some really charged topic that they disagree on. And even if they disagree, they agree on the majority of things, that disagreement will pull them away from each other in a way that they can't cooperate and work towards like a greater good in the world, you know. Um, Maybe like a false duality of like conservative people and liberal people who both care about the environment can't work together to support the environment because they care about it in different ways. And so rather than the environment being protected, because more people are coming together to support it and saying like, no, this is important. We don't think you should pollute because they disagree with like these other issues, then they're like, okay, that's nothing is going to get done. Nothing, the government's like this, nothing's going to get done because we're going to focus on these key issues where we disagree and make that the majority. And that's just like, it's such a human construct and not the way that very much outside of human society works. When you look at the way that natural systems function and ecosystems function and habitats function, it's not that there's no conflict in them because there definitely is. Things are being eaten, things do get destroyed, but there's a lot more cooperation. Um, there's a lot more cooperation within natural systems to make everything work. And it seems that humans have become really good at not cooperating in a way that makes very little work. And so I feel like the more that I can interact with people who think differently than me and be kind to them despite those differences, that is almost like a revolutionary act, weirdly, because I think a lot of people feel like, well, if someone thinks that, then I don't need to be kind to them, or they don't deserve kindness, or only like harshness is the right response to someone who thinks that atrocious thing. But no one wants anyone to think like that about us, right? Like if someone thinks that about what we think, we're like, that's unjustifiable. But if we're doing that to other people, then we should think about that.
Yeah.
We should get into those uncomfortable places, and see like maybe that there's something in our thinking that needs to change. And there's definitely things that I think that are comfortable to me and they make the most sense in the world, but I look at them and I'm like, they're not really actually very functional. Like when I try to apply them, it doesn't make my life or the world better. And so despite like my ideology telling me that like I want to think like this and I can justify why thinking like this is the right thing to do, if it's not actually making the world better, then I've got to try to figure out some different strategy. And that's whether it is working with someone, client with plants, that's interacting with students, that's interacting with just all the personal relationships in my life, and all the people who think differently. It's like, how can I interact with them in a way that is the most cooperative, that I can still like I feel like if I have to lose being kind, I'm losing some of my integrity, in interacting with people. And that's not worth it to me. Like, that's like integrity for me and kindness are pretty high up the list of essentials that I have to maintain to feel good about how I'm existing in the world.
I think that's a harder path. I mean, going back to humanity, we are so much more alike than we are different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no matter how different we can be, like I teach 2 days a week with a forest school, and I have a student who does not speak very much English. And growing up, I'm hearing and my sister is deaf. And so growing up with this like constant awareness to like making sure someone who doesn't speak my language is understanding, and how do I make that connection, even with someone who I can't even like communicate with, like with words, we are still so similar. And why, I mean, maybe do you want to go more into kindness? Because why is it getting harder is my question. Like, why is it? I mean, some of the more, because I grew up very fundamentalist mindset, like fundamentalist Christian. And so it was very like there is a heaven and a hell and a right and a wrong, and I'm safe and I'm not. And, it was very, very clear, and just allowing that all to come away and rebuild something. I still find like this desire in me to go back to that. Like I still desire this, like that's what I mean. Like the sense of knowing that I cling to just brings me closer to the unknown, which the great mystery is to me, the new, like it's the more I step into just the great mystery of it all, it's like, that's my safety now. But I think why is it getting harder? Because at least the people that I know of that I thought were very progressive, which I became to strive to be, I'm like, wait a minute, you don't know anyone from the opposing party? Like you don't have any friends from that you hate so much? Like what? That blew my mind. And maybe that goes back to, the separation of each other and like the need to see like-minded. And we can kind of veer from this subject a little bit because I don't want to like beat it to death.
We can totally get into that, except my computer blipped and said like your battery's running low, but I know it's plugged in, which means that the strip's probably just not turned on. So I'll be right back. So it doesn't abruptly stop me when I'm saying something, and then it just stops, and I'll be like, well, I don't know what I said. So hang on. Do, 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 do.
I'm gonna pause it and fix my lighting too. Cool.
Cool.
More
I
power.
see the little lightning thing of charging happening. So yay. Ah,
Why is
so
kind of hard?
there is an incredible herbalist and human named Asia Suler. And Asia's got article on her website, and I think it's titled like something like nice girls and kind women. And it goes into this idea that there's a difference between being sort of like nice to avoid conflict and to not make waves and to not like ruffle feathers, and so you just like default to just, oh, I don't want to start an argument, I don't want to like create challenge, I don't want to create discomfort, and so I'll just be like submissively nice. And that is not the same thing as being kind, because you can stick up for yourself and maintain your ideals and your integrity and still be kind while doing it. And it's the difference between like, you know, in the world of social media, when you see people discussing, we'll just use the word discussing here, uh, a charged topic. And so often it breaks down into like personal attacks, or like name calling. And that would be a great example of someone not being able to like maintain the integrity of their kindness while dealing with someone who's different from you. And, you know, I've I've spent time with people that ideologically, I find some of the things that are important to them and what they believe to be like that's really how I feel inside. But a decision to be unkind to them because of that um, isn't going to make anything better. It's probably going to make things worse. And yet, a lot of people will, again, ideologically think like, well, that should not be tolerable in any way. But they think that the way it shouldn't be tolerable is like you need to be all aggressive. And I just think like where does that lead us? Because you know, um, if I'm talking with, oh, what is here? If oh, I've got this really interesting Finley Ellingwood stuff, something or another. Finley Ellingwood is my favorite eclectic. It's not a stuffed animal. I don't really know what to call this, but it's the thing at hand. There's who knows what might be on my desk. But if me and Finley are having a debate and we're in conflict, and all of a sudden I start attacking, and we're responding in the binary way that, like you said, so many people, right from when they're young, from when they're first being educated, maybe even before schooling, that there's a right and there's a wrong and there's a, like this way and that way. And I start attacking, Finley becomes defensive, and then Finley starts attacking, I become defensive, and that perpetuates itself and it reinforces the conflict and it creates more distance between us and doesn't bring us closer. And so if I'm with people who think very different things than I do, and I can see that, wow, they still care about their family, they still want to be healthy, you know, they still have grief when they lose someone, whether it's a relationship breaks up or someone passes away, there's that common bond of being human that still exists. And it's just so much easier to take people who are more caricatures of what you think about people who think like something and respond to them with um, indifference, or unkindness because they don't deserve it because of the bad thing that they're doing. And rationally, you can justify that. And online, it's really easy to do that because you don't see the impact that the interactions have with the actual human being. who might feel hurt, you know. Most people, I think, this is just a belief I have, um, and all my beliefs are subject to change, and all my beliefs have room for exceptions. But I think that most people, they respond to things in what I would consider unhealthy ways because they've been hurt, because they have trauma, because they have injuries, right? And I think that trauma is so common in our society. You know, it's not only like assault and wars, like there's just all kinds of things that happen to people that are traumatic, and people feel sensitive and they feel vulnerable and they feel like they have to protect themselves. And just like an animal, which we are, if it's wounded, might lash out and attack when otherwise it wouldn't because it's scared and because it's hurt. People are the same way. And so we have a whole bunch of people who are scared and hurt and traumatized. They've been taught to think about the world in very different ways. And then they're interacting with people from within that place, and they can use ideologies to rationalize why it's okay to justify their actions. But I think most of us at some point in time have interacted with someone, and we, because we've not been in a place of balance, in a place of being really mindful about our actions, have maybe said something mean or hurtful, and then seen the reaction in that person and felt, oh, wow, I did something and it hurt that person. Or maybe a lot of us, we think back to when we were hopefully younger, maybe last week, maybe when we were children, that we interacted with someone and we're like, oh, wow, that was not awesome. That was like not great. Like I try really hard to be kind. A part of why I try hard to be kind is because I do have instances in my past, like I think most people do, where I did something, I don't feel good about it, you know, like I'm not overcome by guilt and shame, hopefully, but I'm like, oh, I did that and that was not okay. I don't feel good about that. That didn't represent the integrity that I want to have. And I either saw or now I can perceive looking back with time and with maturity. I can reflect on it and be like, that caused hurt. I don't want to be a person that causes hurt. That doesn't make anything better. So nothing I do will stop me from being able to sometimes do something that someone's not happy with and feeling hurt, right? That's just always going to happen because people want different things and maybe your needs don't meet up. But I can think about like, is the way that I'm reacting going to cause someone hurt? And do I want that to happen? Does that need to happen? Is there a better way that I can interact with someone? And how will that make the world around me better? You know, and so I had this weird thing happen to me in my life, which is I got interested in herbs back when I was in college. And I stuck with it and never stopped doing it. And eventually I started teaching classes, and I did that long enough, and nice people were supportive of me. And I have become a fairly well-known herbalist. Um, I understand that now, but it's still kind of tripped out, right? To think like that's the reality, that there's a whole bunch of people who I don't know who know me and have thoughts about me and everything. But because that, I know a lot of people, and I interact with a lot of people who have very different backgrounds and very different ideologies that I have, you know. So like I think about just the lindera course, you know, there's well over 1,000 people I think that have come through. No, maybe 1,000, hundreds of people that have come through just the long-term lindera course, and literally thousands of people that have been through classes. And some of them transiently in passing through. Some of them I've established longer relationships with. Some of them very sadly and unfortunately, because I meet a bunch of people at one point in time, you know, I might have seen them and interact with them a lot, but I didn't get to know them as much as they deserve because when you meet a bunch of people all at once, you don't get to connect with everyone as individually as you would like. unless you're an introvert, in which case you've connected with more than you can tolerate at one time. It's harder for you. But I'm pretty extroverted. And I just apply this kind of thinking to like my friends, my my kids' friends' parents, my students, as best I can to my kids and my wife, and my close family. And it's kind of a lot of work. Like it takes a lot of thinking. And, sometimes I'm like, I'm like, I have to, I have to be on my game, to be interacting with the world and the people that I know the way that I want to. And I might just be like tired or off or something. And so we can't expect to always be like, up to snuff. But I think that we should always be actively trying, because if we don't, we're not taking the opportunity to do probably one of the most important things that we can do, which is like try to make the world around us a little bit nicer, and that's like, we have opportunities to do that all the time, at any given time on a Tuesday afternoon when you've got like a spare 20 minutes or half hour, even like 10 minutes, you could drop a note or a message or call a friend or even someone that you kind of vaguely know and like say something nice and kind to them. And it feels good to people. I know that when people were really kind to me and supportive of me when I was trying to do herb work, and I met people and they looked at what I was doing and they said, "Oh, I like what you're doing. I like the way that we're doing. I have the ability to do something that might help you." And we all have the ability to do that if we make it a priority. Like, what's a little thing that I can do to help you? And it might just be saying something nice, it might be just acknowledging someone, what they do or how they treat people, or, just today I got this awesome fennel seed from someone. And I was like, oh, this fennel seed is awesome. I could just make a post about it and say like, this fennel seed is awesome. And the person who sent it to me like saw it and they sent me a message and they're like, oh, I'm so happy you like it. And it was just like a simple thing. And the more that we can interact with each other like that, again, the better that the world gets. I'm an herbalist, and if someone has issues and I have enough me to share, free time, structured time, organizational skills sometimes, it's not only me saying like, oh, maybe you should try some kava kava and some mistletoe and some cordyceps mushrooms. It's also trying to suss out what that person's life is like and what's going on in their life and what their relationships around them are like, and like taking those into account, and like, where are people getting support? Where are they getting positive feedback? What are their relationships like? Is there something, that I can offer? There was someone I remember who moved into Michigan from out of state, and they'd been here. And when I was talking to them about, a much more complicated autoimmune condition, I was like, I've decided that as important as the inflammatory cascade or potential food allergies is the fact that this person moved to a new place and they feel disconnected and maybe kind of lonely. And like, how could I connect them to this new place that they are? Are there groups that they might connect with, or people that they might connect with? And that's as much as a part of medicine as any plant or mineral that I could think. If I'm putting together a protocol for someone, I just have to include that stuff as much as I include all of the herb stuff that I do, because it's holistic. We want to think of the totality of everything.
I'm thinking of your foundational herb craft write up, and 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 the difference between. I actually did find some of the notes I mentioned to you, like in my move. I don't know what all I brought, and I did find a lot of the handouts from Lindera, and maybe I'm thinking of a few things. I'm thinking of the psychology of trauma and the way that it's become like mainstream conversation, and the way we can allow ourselves to see each other as creatures in pain, and maybe that influences the way we treat them. But also sometimes it brings up in people like, oh, that's what's wrong with you. This must be your story. And maybe that's more of, I don't know, separation. And it still goes back to like a holistic, I like what you're saying about strengthening the castle versus defending the castle. And maybe we can get into some of that, like nature connection. I was just looking through, like you put nature is just as important as sleep and nutrition and exercise, and the lack of awareness that people have, even in herbalism. I think before coming to you, I really had a clinical view of things or a culinary view of things. But just the being with the plant and seeing that it's more than medicine, it's more than food, it's a being that I can form a relationship with. And when I came up here, I mean, I felt like just for months, I had this phrase in my head, like, I'm a stranger in a strange land. I was not born in the Pacific Northwest. And it felt so eerie to me for a while. I'm a child of the plains and wide open spaces. And, but forming relationships with the beings here that are plants, and the familiar ones, especially like the weeds.
Yeah. I taught out in Portland for years. I think maybe like somewhere around 10 years. Every year I'd do this really long teaching weekend in Portland. I would like leave Michigan really early, like so much earlier than I want to even be awake, on a Thursday. I would have the long flight into Portland, and I would get there because of the time change earlier in the afternoon. And then I would grab some food. I would go in, I would teach an evening class, and then I would teach Friday for like 4 or 5 hours, and then Saturday for like 8 or 9 hours, Sunday for 8 or 9 hours, and then go home on a red eye flight on Sunday. It was like such a whirlwind trip. But in that time, we would try to like sneak out to a park or something and go somewhere. And I remember being like, oh wow, like there's so much stuff that I don't know, and it feels kind of like alien, to me. And even, talking about feeling grounded, I remember walking through the mountains and like just the feel of my feet on the ground because of the duff that's there. It's not like solid. There's like all of the squish and padding from all of the decayed plant material and moss and everything. I'm just like, this feels so unusual. But what I would do is I would like look for the plants that I did know. I would look for the plants that I did know, a lot of the weedy plants, and be like, oh, okay. So, here is some plantain growing in a lawn. And it's got some of my friends and its friends from back home, but then there's some different things that didn't grow in the area. But that plantain was like a bridge. I remember, I don't know whether it was in a class or just in casual conversation at one conference, but I remember talking with Phyllis Light, or she was talking, and she talked about what'd she call it? Like, if you're moving across the country, you want to like season yourself, which means like ideally you drive, not always practical, but ideally you drive and you like stop and get out of the car every so often. And when like the landscape changes, and like walk around, like walk on that piece of ground. And did she say maybe like if there's a plant, like eat a little bit of it, like a leaf or two of something, and then go to the next place and then walk on the ground, eat a bit of something, and that helps you connect more with the thing rather than like you get in a plane and then poof, you're somewhere totally different and there's been like no transition, especially if you don't have a window seat. No transition. So I have adopted that if I am driving places, I will not just make stops to like go to the bathroom and grab some food or something, but just stop if I can see a place. Here in Michigan, if I go, Michigan looks like this, and I live kind of down here. And if I go like up into this part of the state at all, which I often will do to teach every year or two, there's a few rivers that I cross that I'll like stop and like get out and like touch the water. Like the Osable River kind of goes like across here. Out into Lake Huron. I'm like, oh, I'm crossing the Osable. I'm going to stop, put my hand in the water, think about the time I've spent on that river, and then go on. And that's been helpful to me, So like little practices to help with that connection, and that idea of nature connection. What is the Last Child in the Woods book, the vitamin N person, Richard Louv, I think, wrote a book called Last Child in the Woods, or he wrote a book that was inspired by that, or that inspired that. And nature connection isn't just like an option, it's not just a pleasurable thing to do. Like it has documented effects on your nervous system. It has documented effects on your immune system. So there is like this real strong physiological connection that we have to what we are. And, people talk about being like, oh, humans are disconnected from nature, but I don't know how anyone can be disconnected from nature, because like, where would you be? Right. It's more that we become like unaware of our connection to nature, and that lack of awareness creates all kinds of health problems in us and deficiencies in us. And it also makes us not appreciate this amazing thing that is what we are, that is all around us. And if we don't appreciate it, then we don't take care of it. And if we don't take care of it, then the implications of that are happening all around us, right? The implications for other species, the implications for like the air, the implications for the water. Like if we don't value these things, then it's hard to protect them. And when we feel isolated from it and when we don't interact with it, we don't get to see the impact of those imbalances and the way that they're hitting us, but we certainly do feel it, right? So like the impacts on the weather, people are feeling. The impact on the air quality, people are feeling. We might not feel that I'm sorry to bum people out right now, but all of us have microplastics accumulated in our fat, and we're not going to be able to like cleanse them out right now. We might not feel that, but it's happening to us, right? The more that we connect with nature, the more we connect with nature, the more we can feel about it. I have people sometimes ask me like, oh, one of the things I'm fairly well known for is doing herb walks. I love herb walks. I love getting people out and seeing the actual plants. And my favorite herb walks to do are like around weedy yards. Like that's kind of my fave, because I figure if I take someone out, I could take people out to a place that I know that has maybe the northernmost stand of wild, not planted black cohosh that grows in Michigan. And we could talk about the black cohosh, and I was like, but you can't pick this, don't use it. It's not ethical, it's not sustainable, right? We just want to appreciate this. And like, oh, look, here's this bloodroot, also kind of like more medicinal than you need to be using for most things if you're a beginner herbalist, so don't pick that one. Also some sustainability issues. Oh, here's this trillium. Don't pick that one. There's sustainability issues. And a lot of people, they don't live in the forest, they don't live in a healthy, intact prairie. They live with a lawn around them. And the stuff in the lawn around them is really some of the most useful stuff that I use in my practice. I use plantain a lot more than I use black cohosh. I use, you know, dandelion, and nettle. Like these weedy things are some of the most important things that I use in my practice. And those are the plants that people would see every day. They're the ones that are right outside the door. They're the ones that it's easiest to establish a relationship with. And so to me, it makes the most sense, foundationally, and I like to think about foundations, foundationally, that we learn about like what is right outside so we can establish connection and relationship. And if people start establishing connection and relationship with the weeds that grow in their yard, and they're like, oh, this, depending on where you live, if you're in the Southwest, I don't really know your weeds. If you're in Australia, I totally don't know a bunch of your weeds. I could keep going on, but I'll stop there. If all of a sudden we realize that all of the weedy stuff that we thought was bad in our yard is actually full of virtue, we're probably going to be way less likely to spray weed killer on it. We're probably going to be likely, if we're harvesting it, to maybe be like, oh, maybe I don't want to put this chemical fertilizer down on my yard because I don't know what it's going to do to the stuff that I want to harvest out of my yard. And then we start to have an interaction where the concept of interdependence isn't a mental concept anymore. It's a lived experience. And then when that happens, that sets up this new dynamic way to interact with more of the habitats that surround you and more of the ecosystems that surround you in a very sustainable way of like appreciation, and reverence. And that idea, of like my home is not just the house that I live in. It's just not the square of property or the trapezoid of property, depending on the shape of your yard. On a map, my home is like the place that I live in and the place that I am one of many inhabitants of, one of many animals, an animal among many plants and many different kinds of fungi and a bunch of different kinds of living organisms. And that they're all important, because I feel like once you start establishing a relationship where you value things that are less like people, you start to value more and more and more of them. Maybe not ticks. I don't think many people I try not to not value ticks. I know that they're part of the ecosystem and it's not their fault that they have certain kinds of viruses in them. Still don't love them. But that idea of like having connection is so important. It's fundamental, and it is a missing aspect, where people think like, oh, I think when we think about like the foundational elements of health, we have like diet and nutrition. We have to get all the nutrients our body needs for it to work well. If our body needs to make the color red if our body needs to make the color orange and we have red, but we don't have yellow, we need to get yellow. Otherwise we can't make the color orange, right? So we need the raw materials to make our body work, and we need to be physically active and moving around and using our bodies, because if we don't use our bodies, then they don't develop the ability to do the stuff that they're supposed to do. And we need to sleep well, and we need community, right? And I think we need something to be in awe of, or to be in a state of wonder of. And for me, that's probably like nature, that's the big thing. For other people, it's, this or that religion or this kind of spirituality, that kind of spirituality, or it's physics or math. I don't care I don't care if someone's into math and another person is into a particular kind of religion and I'm into nature. There's just something that when your life is difficult, I feel like if you can see that there's like a larger process that is awe-inspiring going on, then you can step out of your own personal difficulties and be like, oh, but this meadow, or oh, but this river, or oh, but this forest, like it's a reprieve. It's like you can see something happening that's bigger than you, that's still beautiful, and it's still going on despite all of the hardships of reality. And that, I think, is reassuring.
I love that you mentioned wonder, because that's really where my mind was like taking this, and like the need to, I mean, it was on wanders, like WANDER,
Uh-huh.
that I like come back to baseline so often, just allowing myself like a timeless space where I'm like, I don't have any time commitments until like way later. So I can allow myself to let go of time and just wander out, and usually it needs to be unplugged to get to that timeless piece that takes me away from that knowing mind, the mind that really needs to know things, and is maybe in a rush to find an answer. Because I love learning. I really just, I'm so spiritually connected to it in some ways. But that desire that drives me so often, like I have to learn to let go of it, and to step into wonder actually brings me to more learning than I ever thought possible. And I mean, maybe that goes back to like the rational mind, but to let go of it feeds itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like if I think about learning, so I fell into being a teacher, and I I got kind of nagged into teaching the first classes that I did. People were like, you should teach classes. And I'm like, I don't know anything about teaching classes, you know? And then I asked enough time, I'm like, fine, I'll teach a class. I did like a 7 hour block for my first class ever. But I've thought a lot about learning, and about it's all predicated on kind of like my relationship with learning, because I realize a bunch of people learn differently. And some people, what learning means to them is like, oh, there's a bunch of units of information, and the more units of information you've learned, the more that you've learned, right? So it's like learning can be about acquiring new information. Um, and I just think about learning as like growth. Like I learned to grow, I learned to expand my thinking, I learned to um, be able to consider more things when I'm trying to make a decision or choose a course of action, or to think about a particular issue, right? Um, and so I'm trying to expand, but at the same time, it seems like the more that I learn, the more that the way that I apply where I am at in my wondering, my state of wonder, things become a lot more subtle, right? You know, so like earlier when I was learning about herbs, I would learn like this big huge thing or that big huge thing. It'd be like a total paradigm shift. And now that I've got kind of like a paradigm that I've been working with that seems to be working for me, and who knows? I mean, I kind of hope. Well, because of convenience and safety, and the innate human like not to want a major upheaval in your life, I sort of like hope my paradigm keeps working as well as it's been working. I just make more refined, nuanced changes to it.
That seems like
Um,
a sustainable approach as well. I just
right,
want to
right.
say the aspect of things.
Yeah, so that's been where I think about it. And as someone who offers classes, I've got my insecurities. One of the things that has happened since the pandemic, especially, is like more people are doing online classes, and I've got online classes as well as my in-person classes. And for in-person classes, there's if we're thinking about someone doing stuff in a certain area, so mostly I do stuff in a certain area, it's like, oh, there's less quote unquote competition in my area, and I'm kind of like pretty well established. I have a fairly good reputation in my area, so I feel pretty solid with that. And as soon as you have online classes, you have like everyone in the world is doing any kind of online classes, And I will look at their program sometimes and I'll be like, wow, this other person's program, and a lot of these people are my friends, right? Is like, oh, it's so much more structured, and like there's a kind of like step by step sort of like completeness to it. And like maybe they're more concrete. Um, Maybe some of them are a little bit more academically structured. And when people ask me about my teaching and they ask me like this simple question, the relatively simple question of like, so is this like a beginner class or an intermediate class, an advanced class? I'm like, I don't even know how to think about that. I just like, I think that there is um, like my teaching is about a perspective, a way to think about and look at and work with plants. And it is then driven by my personal experience working within that perspective. And I put it together in my own sort of idiosyncratic way where the goal of the class is mostly about thinking how we can refine the way that we're working with plants and interacting with people and interacting with the plants too in a way that is the most functional. And when it comes to some of the particulars and some of the fine details, there's a lot of fine details in the course, but then there are some fine details that are not in the course because I'm like, I don't know whether that's like it's helpful to know, but I don't know if it's essential to know to use plants, because it's a different mindset and modality. And so it's easy to look at more established techniques and patterns of like how we've been taught to learn and see other people doing that and see, like, oh, there are some ways that people seem to really like because it's really familiar to them. And then, I mean, essentially what I'm doing is like a free learning, unschooling way of like, oh, you come in here and my goal as your teacher or as your instructor is not to have you agree with me. Like as much as I'm definitely the instructor of the classes that I teach, my goal is not like, I know a bunch of things that are correct and I'm going to teach them to you. And if you end up at the end of the class thinking the things that I think, then you learned well and you think correct things. I'd rather be like, if the way that I teach is something that you connect with, if it makes things click together for you, because that's something I'm very happy a lot of people have said. Like they'll be like, oh, I've like known all of the tidbits of information about this for a long time, but it never really clicked until you did something with the pool noodle, right? You pulled out the pool noodle, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I get it. And it wasn't filled with all the tidbits of information, and I'm like, oh, okay, good. And that's just like I teach that way because that's the way that I can teach. And I let other people teach the way that they can teach that I might not be as good at. And then I'm like, oh, it's just okay. I can just do what I do. And if I keep doing what I do and what I'm skilled at and have worked to develop, there's always going to be people that will, connect with that and benefit from that. Hopefully.
Did you say, I mean, because my forest school that I work with it's in its inception phase. And so my co-teacher and I are really like in this formulary, like, how do we describe curriculum as, I think sometimes the parents want like a didactic, what are they learning? But like, I feel like a lot of what we're teaching is actually like how to connect with nature. And like, it's the in-between learnings that actually we find really important, because this question that we hold and I hold and why I chose to get into outdoor education is like, how did we learn before public school? And something you just said was like, did you just say that it's not really about plants? Like people don't have to learn how to work with plants. What you're doing is actually like learning in a new, it seems like you're onto like something like, are you
so
describing how to teach or how to learn without the traditional way of learning or
Yeah,
modern way, not traditional way.
I'm pretty like I did well learning traditionally, except I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't find it fulfilling. I did great in my last couple of years in college when I started writing essays. I started writing essays about why an essay to establish whether someone has learned something or not was an adequate way of assessing someone's knowledge.
Mm.
That actually didn't work very well with any of the teachers that I wrote essays like that for. Um,
Go figure.
my children, who we have, let's see, assisted, facilitated, encouraged, they're learning very non-traditionally. Um, they just learn stuff. They learn like a ton of stuff without us actually teaching them, and we know that kids do this because no one really teaches children how to talk, right? No one really teaches kids how to communicate. And then we get to a certain point and we think humans can't learn things unless they're instructed. And then there's like this most effective way to instruct people. And I know that what that way is in conventional learning has changed a bunch, so like the way kids learn math is not how I learn math. And the way kids learn English and phonics is different than when I learned. And so there's some growth there, but really there's growth, but there's also that people just learn. Like if you put people in environments and they are interested, they end up just learning things. And so if I have people that are taking my herb classes, aside from a few instances, like I remember one time I was brought into someone's like health class, is like sort of like I was their part of their health project. And the class that I was speaking for was not really into it, right? But most of the time, the people that come to my classes are there because they are interested. And so if they're interested, I just gotta like my job is to like create an environment in which they can learn. And one of the ways that I do that is by teaching in a whole bunch of different ways. And so I have information, I have stories, and I have analogies, and I have all manner of different kinds of like pool noodles and koosh balls and whatever this Finley Ellingwood thing is, and slinkies and balloons and loofah sponges, that I can use as like visual aids. And one of the things about that is that if I want this spoon noodle to be like the digestive tract, I can make it the digestive tract, and this end is the mouth, and this end is the anus, and I can squiggle it up in the middle. And if I want it to be a blood vessel, right, and I want to talk about how physical tension constricts blood vessels, and that creates more back pressure on the heart and raises blood pressure, all of a sudden, this pool noodle just becomes like the device where rather than having to remember all of the information and write down all of the big words and all the responses and like, what happens with this or with that, people just remember the pool noodle and then they get it, right? So I'm always trying to find engaging ways, but it's usually like there's the information part of a concept, and then there's a story about the concept, and maybe there's an analogy or a silly prompt about the concept, and different people in the class who learn different ways will pick up on maybe one or two of those, and hopefully they complement and reinforce each other. But people just learn because they want to learn. Like if people are curious, they just learn stuff. Like it's just a natural and inherent state of humans, unless they get to the point where, and this is kind of going back to a prior topic, where they learned about something and now they know the answer and they are attached to that answer being true, and therefore they don't need to learn more about it.
We're no
And
wondering about it because
yeah, yeah, they've lost their state of wonder because now that they know something, they don't need to wonder about it because they know it. And different people have different things that they've decided that they know the way things are. And I I do see in individuals and definitely in larger societal patterns that people will invest a lot of energy and engage in a lot of conflict to hold on to that knowing rather than have it, I'm going to say, open up and provide room to learn and, to learn and wonder more because they're stuck with things. But yeah, I do think that when you're teaching people, just like you provide them opportunities. And when people put together things, especially when they put together things differently than I thought about it, and then they come back and tell me about it later, I'd be like, oh, that's awesome. I'd never thought about it like that. Even a concept that maybe I feel like I put out there, and how many things do we really solely come up with ourselves, So I learned concepts from other people, but I kind of put together like an idea and I explained it in a certain kind of way. And I was really happy and proud with it. And then like maybe right at the time I'm teaching it, someone says something back to me, or maybe a few years later, they come back and they're like, I hear that. Or maybe I just hear them talking and they're not even saying it to me. And I was like, oh, that's a better way of thinking about that than what I had come up with, you know. And I think that like a big motivation for teaching is to to share, to share knowledge. And that's a back and forth thing, that it shouldn't be like the teaching, like the idea that teaching is like one way from the knower to like the knowee seems like not a great way to learn because then, I want to learn too. When I started teaching, it was the single biggest like learning catapult in my journey with herbs is interacting with all these people that would ask good questions. I would come up with something and I'd give this explanation and feel like, ooh, that was good. And then somebody would be like, or like, I'd be like, did everyone get that? And, like if more than one person, like if the multiple people are like, no, we didn't understand that at all. Then I'm like on the fly, I had to be like, oh, okay, let me think of a new way to suss that out. And sometimes in those moments of being challenged and having something that I thought was going to work not work, I come up with some new thing that works better, and then that becomes the new thing that I do, and it's like tested and refined. So I think that if you're an educator, one of the things that you're doing is I mean, this would be educators that are able to create their own curriculum, let's call it. You come up with a curriculum and then you try it out and you see the ways that it works or it doesn't work. And then you see the things that work and you're like, oh, okay, good. And you kind of refine those. So hopefully they work better. But also you see the things that didn't work the way that you thought they would. And then you I guess I have to let that go and think up something new. Yeah, it's really exciting, honestly.
yeah, I think one of the most exciting things for me about learning how to learn and like how to teach is the storytelling aspect. And you said I love that you're like there's the information and then there's the stories and the visuals of it. And I have just been amazed at what I've internalized through stories and what I've learned through stories and using it as a teaching tool. I'm like, this is so human. It is so human to embody ideas and beliefs and lessons through storytelling and keeping my heart and ears and mind open to new stories is actually one of it's like the connection point to wonder for me and keeps me aware that I'm not alone because there's always more. There's more to the story. There's always more to the story. There's a phrase for a reason, right?
It's so fun and engaging. I mean, every once in a while, and this has happened more than once, more than twice. I'll be doing something. I'll be like, so you have an infection, and like when the pathogen, like someone sneezes, and it goes in through your nostril, and there's some immune, constituents, processes, components in your mucosa that see the virus, and they pull out their little cell phone and they send a text message up to your immune system to let everyone know we need some white blood cells. They send another text out to the hypothalamus to say, we might need to engage in the fever response. And every once in a while, someone be like, but that's actually not physiologically accurate. And I'm like, really? Like,
but how does it really work, Jim?
I thought that I was presenting it with great physiological accuracy, or I thought it was presenting in a way that was clearly obvious that it was a story and an analogy and like the gist of it, right? But yeah, there are people that are very concrete, and that's okay. They can learn like the 4 however many stages of fever, and each little process, and learn about it that way. That's fine. People can learn different ways. That's great. But I think if people are like, if more of their thinking is engaged, and if you keep switching between like information, story, visual, prop or pantomime, it changes the way that they're taking in the information, that engages different aspects of the way that they learn, so that everything ties together a little bit more tightly, rather than just the more kind of like academic scribble down. I'm going to try to write down as many words or key points of what you're saying, and then later on, I will read them back and try to remember the context of those details, and put them together. And sure, that's another way of learning, and that's totally fine and great that people do that. But I feel like the more different ways, the more you can integrate different ways of learning together, not just the more people that you can reach who learn in different ways, but the more you can tie information together with the gist of something, or information together with the structure of something, or the system that you're using to make something work, in a way that people remember it better and can engage, and then ideally also utilize it better, right? Because in the study of herbalism, and this would apply to also, mushrooms, and this would apply to also using dietary supplements and vitamins and minerals and other kinds of nutritional things, or diet too. Someone can easily put together a bunch of pieces of information, that look great on paper, but they actually don't work well when you try to implement them, because they just, the cohesive system of how they all fit together isn't there, right? It just doesn't seem to tie together in a functional way.
There's so much mystery in the tissues. Like, I think about I would like to get into like the tissue states a little bit, and like the way we were talking about like that, like trauma and like the I'm thinking of, do you know the Emerald podcast? It's like this animist podcast.
No, I don't know.
Highly recommend. But there's some great episodes called "The Revolution Will Not Be Psychologized," and it's all about how like this emphasis on trauma and story and psychology is actually taking us further away from the mystery and ability to stay open and learn about, because like the tissue states, I'm in germ theory and terrain theory, and the ways that those, we like learning about them kind of inform the way I think about medicine. But also there are things that happen in my body that, yes, I can, like what you just said about like, actually it doesn't quite fit, because then things that we don't see coming start to happen, and we can't quite figure it out because it's not this like systemic, like here's the perfect cycle of disease and healing, and like it's a closed loop thing. Not quite that way. There's more to there's more virtues and things happening that we can't quite see and understand and or even learn about until it happens. And even then it's like, what the hell is this?
One of the phrases that I came up with that I love, if there's a quote that people could remember me by, this might be the one that I would want above all others, which is, you can't eat soup with it. You don't eat soup with a light bulb. And what that means is that like light bulbs are awesome. Like right now, they're illuminating me. I'm in my basement. It'd be kind of dark right now, right? It's helpful to have light bulbs. Light bulbs are awesome. They're an amazing tool. They do amazing things. But if you want to eat soup, that's not the tool that you would use. You would need to use something different. And the analogy I think that's for is that sometimes there's situations that happen that your intellect isn't going to figure out, right? And some people, not everyone, some people really the way they engage with problems is they use their intellect primarily to figure out a course of action to resolve the problems. And there are definitely people who could do that more than they do. And that would be great. But there are some people that that's the way they go. And if they're applying that to something that your intellect, it's not a logical situation, right? It just doesn't, logic isn't going to be the thing that figures it out. Then that's like trying to eat soup with a light bulb. I was talking to, I got to spend some times with Janet Kent and Dave Meesters, and they have an herb school in North Carolina, I think in Marshall, called the Terra Silva. It's called Terra Silva. There might be School of Herbal Studies or School of Botanical Studies or something after that. But let's see. Janet Kent and Dave Meesters, they were the people I was spending time with. And Jen Stovall is also an instructor at that school. And they're all just awesome herbalists and great people. They've got it all going on. It's definitely like, if people were to be like, who are other people you think if we like the system and the way of thinking that you use to apply herbalism, like who else would you recommend? They would be some people. And Dave Meesters evidently said like, oh, sometimes I say like it's hard to dig a hole with the basketball, and I was like, oh, that's another awesome one. I love that. Yeah. And it's all about different things happen to us. And sometimes we might be trying to approach it through one way of assessment or one way of thinking or one way of processing. And if we're not getting anywhere with it, like if it's not working, we might just be not accounting for something that can totally happen. But also we just might need to try thinking about it, or maybe not thinking about it. Try assessing it, or try wondering about it in a completely different way so that we can get a completely different set of insights. And every once in a while, I will be around people who I honestly consider to be much smarter than me. And because I think I'm pretty clever. Like, I think I'm cleverer than I am smart. Like for me, if I think about the word smart, I think about people who have like a bunch of stuff, like they have more information in their heads than I do. And they'll be like, oh, like I like this concept that you have. I like the way that you frame this idea. And like I haven't heard of a frame like that. I haven't thought about it like that. And I think a reason is because some of those came from me like not thinking it out, not learning about it, but just like open-endedly wondering about it. And that's what I came up with it. And even if, and often if, the way that I think about it isn't like point by point, fact by fact, detail by detail, like factually correct, it can still be a functional way to address an issue. It can still be a functional way to consider a course of action. Because, I get to quote Rabindranath Tagore. There's an Indian poet named Rabindranath Tagore. And obviously this is a translation, so it's a paraphrase. But he wrote, "Truth in her dress finds facts too tight. In fiction, she moves with ease." And other than just being beautiful, as a quote. I mean, that's a beautiful quote. The thing that I like about that is oftentimes we want, again, because I think the way that we're taught to learn in Western cultures, we want to be like, well, if this is correct, it's because it's factual. And I think that, like, well, being entirely factual doesn't necessarily make things more true than something being a story or something being an analogy or something being fictional. If we look at like a US history book and we say like, oh, this is composed of a bunch of facts, and so therefore it is more true than, let's say, Tolkien, um, I would probably disagree with that, you
Or
know?
even anecdotal stories of history, you know, like
Right.
that often like folklore or
Yeah.
tale,
So
tradition, not taken as
it's not that fiction or poetry is less true than facts. They're just different. They're just thinking about our experience of this life that we have in a different way, and it has the same amount of value. It's just a different kind of value.
it
So
reminds me of like the way it's actually how we respond to what we come to know. Because there is, like I said the word safety a few times, and like like just the concept when I first started teaching kids, I just thought of it so much. It's like, how is it my job to keep them safe? How is safety important in my role here? And
mm,
and I've kind of come to think like it's really not that important. Like it's my job to keep them safe. But
uh,
like the need for increased safety so that like this is a safe space, um, I think sometimes takes us off our learning edge, or like the openness to like the closedness of it. Um, I don't know. There's also something about home there, like going home, like feeling like safe at home, um, versus like being confronted by this new story or like this contradiction to my beliefs or something that I find challenging or just flat out not true or disagree with. Like, how is home tied into all that? Maybe.
well, I think I want to pick up on the safety part because I have something, and this would be like, oh, this would be one of those things where I think like, this could be misconstrued. This could be misinterpreted. Like someone could get upset with me about this, but I'm just going to go there anyway. Um, it is really common and for good reason that people will have written statements or policies of creating, and I'm doing like quotes here, like a safe space. And I do not have one of those for my course or for anything that I do. Um, and the reason that I don't have one is because I really like I don't believe in it. And not that I don't believe in what I think is the intention of this idea. I don't believe that saying using the word safe works. Um, because I don't, to me, that word does not mean how it's being used. Um, if someone were to come to me with a particular problem, right? And I've had, I have a humble, or just to state this, I have a very small and what I call a humble herb practice. I don't see like dozens and dozens of people. Like it's small and personal. It can be kind of sporadic based on how much me I have to and what my current capacity for organization is. But I've had people that I've worked with who have had life-threatening conditions that are physiological. I've had people that have had like really intense emotional and cognitive issues. I've had people with colds or people with sprained ankles. They've kind of like run the gamut. And within that, if I think like, oh, part of my informed consent form, maybe I've had people say like, oh, you should have like a safe space policy. And I'm like, oh, but I can't do that because not only do I sort of like disagree with the wording, but I think that so much of what I do is inherently not actually safe. And it doesn't mean that someone's going to come and talk to me and be harmed, right? I'm going to do my uttermost all to make sure that doesn't happen. But I feel like the things that are maybe required for a lot of personal growth and for a lot of transformation are like vulnerability and challenge. And being vulnerable isn't, I don't know that I would use the word safe for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that feeling vulnerable is not something that most people associate with safety. Being challenged is not something that most people associate with safety. What I hope to do is I hope to create an environment with students and with clients and with just anyone in my life where like we trust each other. Like that anyone who has a relationship with me can trust me that the interactions that I have with them, I am really trying with my integrity and who I am and who I want to be as a person to like treat them in a good way and to do the things that I can do to make their life better in some way, or bring what they are saying that they want into their life. And that might not be comfortable. That might not feel safe, if someone has you know any of the many different experiences of trauma that they can have in their life and they're coming to someone to help to sort of like navigate their trauma responses, that's just not a safe thing to do. But we can still do it in a way where there is trust. And, for some people, maybe that's what they mean when they use the word safe. But
Mm-hmm.
to me, I think that a lot of people have sort of like, if haven't thought about it, and ever since I was a kid, I used to read like dictionaries and thesauruses. So I've
Yeah.
thought about words my whole life, and like what's the right word, and like, oh, some words are like overused and they lack sort of like nuance, and some words are overused and they have more nuance than is commonly given to them. Um, but I think for me, this idea of like safe means that someone would be like, oh, wait, I felt challenged. That felt unsafe to me. I felt vulnerable. That felt unsafe to me. And so therefore, this was not a safe space. But I think like, it might have been, there was a guy, he passed away maybe a couple years ago. He was a therapist who did a lot of relationship and sex therapy for people. And his name was David Snarch. And one of the things that he said relationships are like people growing machines, that they teach people to how to grow, and they do that through challenge. Like if you're in a relationship with anyone, you're going to have challenges in that relationship because there are no two people alive or three people alive or seven people alive, right? Because we have all kinds of different relationships where everyone just only all want the same things. You're always going to get to a point where people have different needs and different ways that they want things done. I might have a student who is like, oh, he's so rambly. Like if I were to write the sentence, like if I was really taking notes, there would be like one sentence with like a page and a half long that's all run on sentences, And so different people have different needs and everything. And if a person's needs aren't met and they're challenged and that doesn't feel safe to them, that it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that their discomfort in the way that an experience was happening was discomfort related to any kind of danger to them or potential harm to them, right? It might be that for some of us, that it takes challenge to break us out of the learned and habituated behaviors that we've developed. And that can be experiential. And sometimes, because I'm an herbalist, and get back to herbs a little bit, that might be like I talk to someone and, I'm like, oh, well, I want you to exercise more. And the exercising more is more about like physical ability. It's not like, I don't generally think like, oh, this person is overweight. The cure to being overweight is they need to exercise more. There's a lot of problems with the way people interpret and stereotype and make assumptions about someone's body, right? But I think about like if someone is inactive, inactivity like lowers ability, inactivity raises blood pressure, inactivity negatively affects stress, inactivity never like it makes you feel more tired, but it makes you like not be able to rest and sleep as well, right? So there's all kinds of problems with inactivity. And someone might be like, well, I don't like that's the thing. Can I just like take some supplements or take some herbs? Like I don't like
Yeah.
being active feels hard for me. And this is maybe very common. And I can totally relate to this. If someone, let's say, has chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or Lyme or long COVID and their body hurts. And I'm like, yeah, you need to like move around and you like not only have to move your body around, you have to also do some resistance exercise. And they'll be like, okay, that doesn't feel good. That hurts. It aggravates my condition. Like if my joints hurt and you're asking me to move around, like the reason I'm not moving around is because my joint hurts. Don't you get it? And what I would say is like, but not moving around will make your joints hurt more than moving around will make them hurt over time. And so there's challenge there, and there's creating and engaging and moving through a discomfort to get to a different place that is inherent in that challenge. Another thing might happen is like, I tell people all the time, like, you need to eat bitter stuff, right? And people be like, yeah, I heard that if you, you should listen to your body. And if your body tells you it doesn't like something, it just means that your body doesn't need it. And, I tried eating a bowl full of dandelion greens as a salad and I didn't like it. And so my body says I don't need bitters. And I'd be like, I don't think that's actually the right interpretation of that. Bitters are a challenge, right? To our normal preference, maybe for sweet things. We eat sweet things and we feel really great right when we have them, and then maybe not so great afterwards. And we eat bitter things. And for people who haven't added bitters to their diet yet, often they don't taste very good right when they're first eating them. But if they keep up with it, if they actually spend some time being uncomfortable and going through that discomfort, which does not feel safe, they might get to the point where like, oh, initially I did not like these when I first had them, but after I ate them, I started to feel better. And because I stuck with it, because I got through that discomfort, because I got through that challenge, now I associate the flavor of eating them with the better that I feel later on. And I do like them now. And if I don't eat them for a day or two, or at least weekly, I'm like, oh, I can tell I haven't had bitters and I need to get more bitters in my diet. And so this idea of like, how we define what we mean when we talk about safety and we talk about safe spaces, and in terms of like this idea of the forest school. I mean, like, obviously, if there's, and I know that you don't have crocodiles in the Pacific Northwest, but obviously, like, if there's a lake full of crocodiles, you don't like send the kid in there and be like, oh, we don't need to create safety for them. They'll figure out how to, interact and maybe like move through the pond really quietly and not create ripples and stir up the crocodiles. You wouldn't do that. That's not what we're talking about. But in terms of things like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't let children climb trees. Maybe we should keep children away from any plants with thorns. Maybe if is poison ivy, we should kill the poison ivy if a child might be anywhere near it, rather than teaching them to recognize the poison ivy. Or the same thing with other poisonous plants. All of those could be seen through the view of safety, but you also lose an opportunity for growth in those situations.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple one-liners. Kayla Rowan, my first herb teacher who introduced me to your work, used to say the medicine is in the dose. Yeah, hey Kayla. She would say that the medicine is in the dose, and like to titrate your own exposure and to break down safety from like risk versus danger versus vulnerability versus, a comfort. I think that's another, like, survival school. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable, like just to build a relationship with your own comfort and your own fears and your own vulnerability, and to learn to, I kind of have figured this out over time. Like, don't overwhelm yourself for the sake of learning. Like, to build that relationship is actually much more powerful.
That's such a common thing. One of the things that I've noticed, I've been, let's see, I think I've been working with plants, like with herbs specifically, for about 30 years now. And I've been teaching for over 25 years, which is funny because every once in a while, I think it was like 4 years into it when I started teaching. Every once in a while, one of my friends who I like and agree with on a lot of things to be like, oh my gosh, there's these people that are like teaching about herbs, and they don't have any kind of formal training, and they've only been doing it for so long, and they're out there teaching classes, and like, what's up with that? And I was like, that's what I did, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have formal training. As long as people know when to say like, oh, I don't know, or I don't have that experience, I don't know about that herb, you can still safely and effectively teach about things. There's a lot of people who could teach an awesome class about like peppermint and spearmint that could change people's lives, even if they had no formal training. But I think that
back to relationship and connection.
Yeah, people seem. One of the things I notice is people really seem to be in a rush to get to being like the best, whatever they think the best kind of herbalist is, right? And it's almost like I'm still working on it. And I totally 100,000% know that I have holes in my knowledge in certain areas. In those areas, I will just say things like, that's not, that's not my area of expertise. That's not something I have experience with. I might know this person or that person I can, refer you to or tell you to look into. But like, I've had a long sort of like low and slow learning over time way of following this herbalism path. And it's not that I think that the schools that teach clinical herbalism that have like, maybe like a 2 or 3 year program are bad or people should avoid them. But I think that like 2 or 3 years and then thinking like, okay, cool, now I have reached the pinnacle of being a clinical herbalist. And it's just something that I can't relate to. And I think that if I would have gone to something like that, I don't think that's not the way that I could have learned, it would have been like too fast and rapid for me to do that. But I do see this. It seems like in the dominant culture, competition is like this theme. And sometimes I see something that I would describe as like competitive herbalism. It's like, I remember being at a conference one time and there were two people, they were talking and they're like, well, how many people are you seeing a week? Oh yeah, well, I'm seeing this many people a week. And I was just like, oh my God. Ah. And okay,
Sure.
I can make space for there to be competitive people. One of my friends from elementary school and middle school and then high school and then even into college was always really into sports. And I think he's like the greatest guy ever. And that would, he was always into competitive things. And that's okay. But I think we need to be like mindful of that and conscious of that. And maybe from at least my perspective, like a little bit wary of that because it sets people up into thinking to feeling insecure
Mm.
because they start comparing themselves to other people and thinking like, well, oh, but that person, either does or appears to know more than I do. And I've been studying longer, they've been studying for less time, or maybe the way that they were learning is a better way to learn because they know the stuff that I don't know. And it's probably the case that you just know everyone knows different stuff. Certainly there are people that because of the way that they are engaging and applying their learning, they may be more skilled at sharing that with other people, either through teaching or through seeing clients. But I don't think that there's like this one path, and I do feel like kind of a level of surprise when I meet people who are clinical herbalists who started like 3 years ago. Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out like the Krebs cycle.
Me too.
I haven't got that one down into a simple analogy where I just do the analogy and they have the gist. But yeah, I should really like spend the winter focusing on that so that I can do that. But right now, if anyone asked me to talk about the Krebs cycle, if I were to start, I'd have to like stop halfway through and be like, you know what? I shouldn't have started. I should have just said, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah. I feel like I learn a lot from those types of people. I mentioned like I find comfort in acknowledging the great mystery of things, but I also
Um,
I'm like I do find comfort in the people that are like, no, we do know things. Like
right.
here's the truth of it. I've heard an anthropologist say that like I don't think there's a right way, but there are some wrong ways. And like that going back
Yeah.
to kindness, like insulting, harming, like do no harm is part of like this oath that we take as clinicians for a reason. Like we're not setting out to harm. Um, and I just want to say, I acknowledge we've been at this for a while, and I want to respect your time. And do you have time for like some rapid fire questions? I have just like some
Oh,
random
yeah.
ones.
I so rock at rapid fire questions. I'm sure my answers will be so rapid fire.
And maybe what you were just kind of talking about, like hearing some other herbalists the way, and just the field as a whole. I thought of this question this morning, and I'm like, I wonder what Jim would say to this. So, first one, what's a plant that you just wish people would get over? Like stop talking about it like it's the end all be all, and like get over it.
So what I want to like idealistically say is like I don't feel like that about any plants. They're all living beings and I love them all. Um
Maybe not get over it, but like
might
it's not the what people
it
say.
might be like rhodiola if I had to say something. Like, like everyone can say like all of these amazing things about rhodiola and your liver and your immune system and your nervous system and your vitality and your HPA axis. And I just think, but it's so stringent. It's like so stringent, even for the damp people. How long can they take that before they start to wither? So yeah, I'm going to go with rhodiola there. I don't dislike rhodiola as a plant. I've sat with it. It was a wonderful and beautiful plant, but yeah, I feel like it just seems to be like really kind of like
Up.
pushed with it's pushed with information about its uses
Mm,
without enough context to frame appropriate use is maybe how I would say
great.
rhodiola.
Okay.
What's right?
That makes sense. Um, oh, I want to like spend 3 more hours just talking about bitters, but there was, I think it was the class. I remember exactly where I was sitting in this pavilion because I was like, this is my teacher because I have bitters are like my thing. When I moved here, I bitters. I just make a lot of them. And if I brought things into one local shop here in Duval, and it was my bitters, and I'm connecting with all sorts of local people about bitters now. Why are bitters this like in a connection to our emotional body?
Okay, so I have a couple ideas about that. So physiologically, I'll do the physiological thing. Not only does your digestive system, which if it's running deficient, doesn't maybe produce as many digestive secretions like saliva and stomach acids and enzymes and bile and pancreatic enzymes as it should, but your digestive tract also produces a lot of serotonin and dopamine and natural benzodiazepines and endorphins, which affect our emotional and cognitive experience. And there is, let's say, speculation at this point in time, because I'm not sure. I'm talking about research, so I want to be clear that this isn't like a absolute, decided, settled fact and truth. That if your digestive system is running kind of like sluggish and hypofunctioning and maybe not producing the optimal level of dietary secretions to absorb and to break down and absorb your nutrition, it might also not be producing adequate levels of these different kinds of things that affect your cognitive and mental and emotional experience of life. So that's maybe like a physiological aspect to it. I think also like outside of people who are maybe traumatized by being forced to eat like too much radicchio when they were a child, right? So we're going to put those people aside. Most people don't have trauma around the bitter flavor. And the only place that you taste and experience bitterness is in that present moment. And so much of our fear and worry and anxiety and triggered flashback trauma, past trauma responses occur when we are not really in the moment that we're in. We're like back there in the past, triggered by something that happened to us or trying to process it, but that processing experience is maybe like getting the better of us and we're reacting to it in the moment as if it's actually happening. Or we're like really anxious and worried about something in the future, whether it's a specific thing or a nebulous who knows what, and we're responding and reacting physiologically in the present moment to that as if it's happening in the present moment. But neither of those things are happening in the present moment, right? We might be just comfortably sitting on our very comfortable couch, if you're lucky enough to have a very comfortable couch, and our cat might be next to us, and we're like, oh, we're just sitting there petting the cat, but we're not really embodied. And when we taste something that is bitter enough to sort of like give us a kind of shudder, and I don't know whether I or Matthew would. I know it happened in a conversation where we were driving to the airport for him to go back to Minnesota at the time. And it was years and years and years ago. And we were talking about bitters and we were talking about like that sort of like shudder that they give you. And one of us, maybe it was me, maybe it was him, uttered the two words shuddering bitters. And I've thought about that ever since. And I think about like there are certain bitters that are bitter enough to give you kind of like a little quiver and shudder. And those help to sort of like get you back into your body where it's at so that you can check in with your body where it's at and be like, wait, that's not happening now. I'm right here now. I'm here. I'm on my hopefully comfortable couch if you're so blessed as to have one. I'm subconsciously giving you the state of my couch.
There are no comfortable couches. They don't exist.
Right. And then it's in that moment that you have some agency, and not 100% agency, but some agency over your response. It's in the present moment that you can like take a deep breath. It's in the present moment that you can kind of say to yourself, this thing that I'm reacting to isn't happening right now. And I've heard people make, I think, a legitimate argument of like, there are some people that because of trauma, they don't really feel safe in your body. And so if you trigger them to be embodied, it actually makes their anxiety worse. But that's not how we're using bitters. We're using it when someone isn't in their body. They're dealing with something, a mental process that's putting them out of the present moment, either backwards or forwards, and trying to get them into the only moment that they can make change in. And so I think that bitters can do that. If I had to pick like favorite bitter for that, it might be like sweet flag or calamus root, and to chew on a little bit of that. I don't know that I think that dandelion, root is like right level of shudder. It's something that it's got to be like you taste it and you're like, oh, wow, that's notably bitter.
Gentian.
Yeah, gentian would work. And I mean, even some of like where is it? Is it right here? Is it right here? Is it right? I'm just starting to play around with this, but it is a jar of burning bush. The really, it's what, Unanimous alatus. It's a really bitter antimicrobial and antiparasitic that was used in Chinese medicine, not a major plant that they use anymore.
The one that I'm thinking of grows in the Midwest too?
Yep. It's a non-native invasive species, has winged branches. And it was used for, as I was taught about it, and a concept in Chinese medicine that, to my knowledge, and I am no expert in Chinese medicine, is less commonly applied now, called Gu syndrome, which is where something is happening to you like an infection or a parasite, and it's kind of like taking over your life and like possessing you. And this is something to kind of like pull you out of that. And where I want to start exploring with it is chronic Lyme, long COVID, sort of like these maybe like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, sort of these like, we're not quite sure what it is, but there's this thing that happened to the person, and it's sort of like pulled them away from the life that they had, and now their life is sort of like revolving around this thing that they've got going on, and it's really intensely bitter. And will it potentially like maybe both fight potential infection, but also give them that the shuddering part, I think, and maybe this is about like having watched, I don't know that I've seen this in any recent media, but that concept of like someone's completely freaking out, you grab them and you like shake them and you're like, get a hold of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Except it's the bitter. Hey, like come back to yourself. Come back. So that's a wonder. And this is all for me still experimental. Like I'm just beginning to play around with this. I don't really have any experience based. I'm collecting information stage and not like taking that information and making statements about it. This is just the beginnings of my wonderings.
Cool. Well, I mean, that so encapsulates like the journey of what bitters are for me. I mean, I called it microdosing bitterness. I was actually like working through like my own resentments while dropping bitters on my tongue and like holding it, and like it was like a meditation for a while. But where was my train of thought going just there? Oh, the objectifying the body. I think like when with healing and trauma, like I see like the body, you are more than just your body. You are more than your body. But like actually everything you are has passed through this object, and this object is stuck somewhere. And so working with the discomfort is the only way you're going to rewire and like reforge a new pathway, is like meeting it where it's at. And it's so uncomfortable, and it does make my face do this and my muscles do this. And I mean, I sometimes in my bitter meditations, I would spontaneously cry because I was connecting to something that is real, and it happened here. And no matter which direction I'm pulled from, I love that class. I think it might have been our last class of like the 3 moments, like the center, the present moment. We're always connected to those things, but like just to just constantly remind, like actually it's here that the work, it can be done.
I think
So,
the first thing I would say is like that you don't need anything for is like take a breath. You can only be mindful of your breath in the present moment. Like you can't be mindful of your breath in the past or mindful of your breath in the future. You're only mindful of your breath in the present moment. That's so much easier said than done, you
totally.
know. As someone who's like literally been listening to a Thich Nhat Hanh audiobook about breathing and then like daydreamed off and stopped paying attention to my breathing as Thich Nhat Hanh is
It's
telling
fun.
me to pay attention to my breathing.
Breathe in, I am my body. Breathe out, I am
Yeah.
my. Yeah. Uh, okay, well, that kind of goes in next rapid fire question. These aren't super
Oh,
rapid.
I'm doing great at rapping.
Are you okay with a few more? Are
Yeah,
you good on?
totally.
Okay. Energetics, like something you described at one point, like as described yourself as a vitalist or vital herbalist or a vitality, focusing on the vitality of things. And I'm wondering where that came from, like with your energetics experience, or like, do you still see herbalism as, kind of going back to nature connection, how actually everything, thinking of like the Disney Pocahontas movie that I was raised on, like the
Uh,
rock and the tree and everything has a life and a spirit. And how did you come to be that?
so going back to my
Maybe
childhood,
describe
um, I was
vitality, maybe.
raised I was not raised with like any kind of religion. Probably the closest thing that I've been raised to with religion was the Star Wars, like the original first Star Wars when it was out in the movie theater concept of the Force. That the Force is an energy field that runs through all living things, and I have not abandoned that yet. I still that sentence still pretty much holds for me. I would probably, although I don't normally, if I had to describe like my spiritual bent, I would probably maybe use the word animist, in that I think that like everything that is imbued with spirit, and the if I had to answer the question like, well, what do you think is the great spirit, or what do you think is God or goddess or whatever, I'd just be like nature. I think that nature is everything that is. There's nothing that isn't nature, so everything that is nature. The collective conscious of all the things that exist are nature, and that I guess would be God or the Great Spirit. And we all have our individual connected part of being that nature. We are that thing, and then every once in a while we have these moments of illumination where we we experience, and probably unless you're a great poet, can't fully convey like the larger connection, in those really amazing moments of epiphanies or enlightenment or like states of wonder. I think that I learned the term like vitalist as related to herbalism from Paul Bergner. When I was first learning, it was pre pre social media. There were like message forums, and some of them were email, like Yahoo groups, or Henriette Kraft had this her Herbalist, which was an email list. Everything came into your email, and there were a few like message boards. There was the Herb Wiffery forum. There was the Susan Weed Wiseman forum. There used to be this thing called the Tribe forums. I still know a bunch of people from that era. And all of the weird, I always use my name and they always had different names. And then later on, like years later, I'm like, oh, you were Pink Pants? Like, I didn't know that was you. Um, I think there
Recent.
was Pink Pants. I'm trying to remember who that is. Um, but Paul Bergner was active on those. He was one of the herbalists who, and this is something that really inspired me to also be this way. He was one of the herbalists who had a lot of experience, who did not think it was beneath him to interact and answer and give insights to like the beginners who were trying to figure out beginner issues and didn't know the stuff that he did. A lot of people, and some of this is because they're busy, they didn't have time. I totally get that. But a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to answer those beginner questions. But Paul was just amazingly generous with his time and experience and wisdom. And he used the term vitalist. And in the game of operator, I might not repeat this back in a way that he would be like, oh, that's what I said. But the gist of it that I picked up was if you're working within a tradition of vitalism, primarily the way you are trying to use herbs and medicinal agents is to look and say, what does the body want to do? How does the body want to respond? Like, what is the natural and effective way that the body would respond to this particular situation? And if there is something that is inhibiting that response, how would I use herbs? How would I use nutrition? How would I use diet and lifestyle and activity and exercise and time in nature to facilitate that reaction, as opposed to thinking, how can I get this plant to do something to that person, rather than having the plant be a catalyst to facilitate a response, right? And maybe like just a quick concrete reaction of that. And no one, this is the binary analogy, and we don't have to be binary. We can totally do both. If I had to think about using an herb that more specifically supported my body's responses, its natural responses and its natural processes to fight an infection, or I can take an herb that directly killed a pathogen that was maybe causing an infection, I would prefer to focus on the herb that supports what my body is doing rather than the herb that does something for my body. Or one more analogy, I would rather take bitters if my stomach acid was low, because bitters will stimulate my digestive system to produce more of its own stomach acid, then take apple cider vinegar or betaine hydrochloric acid supplements to increase the stomach acid because my stomach acid is low, because that's like there's something from outside of me that's doing something for me that my body's not doing, rather than something that is a catalyst to get my body to do the thing that it wants to do anyway. And that is my understanding of vitalism, and the way that I want to think about mostly using herbs is how can I get the herbs to facilitate the reactions that are what my body wants to do. And usually what I do is I think that's my starting place. That's where I'm going to come up with a strategy or a formula or a protocol. And then after I use that as my protocol, I might say, yeah, and I'm on top of that, I'm going to throw in some stuff there that's just going to kill some stuff. Right.
Is that kind of the difference between the way you separated primary versus foundational?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about, and this requires people to understand, but my energetic system that I sort of came up with is in Western herbalism, we have all these actions, and the actions might be that something is a bitter, or it is a demulcent, or they might be that it is a diuretic or an expectorant, or it might be that it's an antimicrobial or an anti-inflammatory. Bitters and demulcents are actually qualities in the plant that you can think about as acting on the way that someone's body is presenting. And from there, you can infer a bunch of likely ways that it's going to act in the body. And that is specifically correlated to a person and how they're experiencing something. If I say expectorant or if I say diuretic, that just kind of tells you where something is working, but it doesn't tell you how it's working. So I have an herb that's an expectorant. It's going to help someone who needs to facilitate their cough reflex, maybe to clear out an infection, a lower respiratory infection. But do I need a warming aromatic expectorant for damp congestion, or do I need a moistening demulcent expectorant for drier congestion, or do I need a more relaxant expectorant if someone has a lot of spasmodic coughing? So I go back to my foundational actions to choose what kind of primary action, expectorant in this case, I need to choose, rather than just saying I have a list of expectorants, I'll choose whichever one I have, right? Because I might choose something that's an expectorant, but not specific expectorant for that particular person. And then terms like antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory, which are huge marketing terms, especially anti-inflammatory, they don't tell you where something is anti-inflammatory. Is it anti-inflammatory all over? Is it just anti-inflammatory for maybe where it comes into contact in the digestive tract? Or in the respiratory tract? Is it an anti-inflammatory that everyone and anyone can use, or might it aggravate some people and not other people? So like cayenne is a great anti-inflammatory, but if I were to see a person who had an inflammatory condition, but they were really like flushed and their skin was really red and hot and they were all sweaty and everything, that's not a person I would give cayenne to. And it's not because it's not a good anti-inflammatory, but the way that that particular herb is anti-inflammatory isn't what that person needs, because it's a peripheral circulation stimulant and something that stimulates sweating, and that's already happening with that person. And I don't need to like aggravate that. That would be kind of like if someone was really, they had a lot of like thick, damp congestion, and I was like, you should drink a ton of dairy and eat ice cream and cheese, right? That wouldn't make sense. But, and I know some people are allergic to dairy, but if you're not, if you had really a really tenaciously dry cough, and you use dairy, which is mucus forming, it can be a really great expectorant and really moistening to the mucosa, the respiratory tract, because of the damp, moistening, demulcent quality that dairy possesses.
Because of it. Cool. I encourage anyone listening to dive into Lindera to learn all about that, or your writing, because you have so much writing out there. So my last 3 questions is one single writing tip for people. I love your style of writing because it's like I'm just listening to you talk to me as I read.
Huh?
And I got out of my writing habit and practice. And do you have a tip for like how do you get connected with writing again if you get out of it?
Probably what I do is before I start writing stuff down, I've sat down and I've like wondered about it and I've thought about it and I've come up with some ideas. And for me, and I know other people have very, very different process in this. For me, like I try to mostly dive into what I think and how I want to put things together. And then I start writing it out and playing around with arranging it. And like sort of what the skeleton or the structure of it is going to be, and like what the right order, to present things in is. And then usually it's not until after I do that I will go and look to see what other people have written and said, and see how that might inform me to like flesh out an area or throw in a quote or be like, oh, wow, I didn't even think of that. Maybe I need to work on this a little bit longer. I know some people that what their starting place is to really collect a bunch of information first. And that can be like studies from other herbalists and research on plants and, looking in lots of books. And just personally for me, I find that if I do that, too many of other people's ideas and approaches and styles get into my head for me to at least get out like the way that I'm thinking about something, right? I get muddied by other people's things, and then I don't feel like I feel like when I do that, I put together like a mosaic of a lot of other people's ideas, more so than like a foundation of my idea that is sprinkled with other people's insights to fill in areas that maybe I don't have fleshed out as much, or someone just explains better than I do. And sometimes it's taking me, oh gosh, sometimes it's taking me. I think the cardiovascular class in the Lindera course, I don't, even though I've been doing the Lindera course for like well over maybe like 18 years, something like that. I don't think I had the cardiovascular hand up written until like about 4 years ago, because I never was able to put it together in a way that I was like, oh, this is good. I like this. And I'm still working on refining that one and tweaking it. I think it's probably right now there's more different drafts of that one, like in the folder that's stored in, where I've like updated it like every maybe like 3 or 4 months. I'd be like, oh, wait, I need to I had an idea. I need like that's a better way of explaining that, or I learned this new thing. I need to put that in there.
Okay.
It's taurine. I didn't talk about taurine in the first draft. I need to put taurine in there.
So
Uh,
focus on original thought and allow yourself the space to refine.
yeah. And other people work differently. I and this is totally preference. For me, if I am reading other people writing about herbs, I don't want the writing to be objective. Like when I read really objective writing that is all citations and I don't get a sense of the person who's writing that information, um, it's just, I don't connect with it as much, you
Mm.
know. I know a bunch of like really brilliant herbalists and they all have these, unique insights and I want that to come through. Like, so for me, when I'm reading something, I want to get a sense of the person who's writing it. And that actually helps me establish like, oh, have I decided in reading this that I find the person's information is reliable? Because there are a lot of books, and I know currently at the time that we're talking, I see all kinds of posts on social media about like the fear of artificial intelligence, compiling these books on edible plants and mushrooms and medicinal plants. And, like we should really be terrified of that because artificial intelligence doesn't have the ability to know all the important stuff. And I think like, wait, but that's already been happening with humans. A bunch of humans who don't use herbs are able to like scour the internet and read books and look up citations. And I'm just not going to name any names, although I could, and create books that people get and occasionally tell me like, oh, I really love that book. And I'm like, that would be like getting a book about how to repair your car by someone who has never, ever repaired a car.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's a good idea. I feel like I want to have a sense that when I'm looking at information and when I'm deciding how much I can value or trust information, that that person has actual experience working with that plant. They know what it feels like in their body. They've worked with hopefully more than just their body, right? So it helps when people and then people don't need to have worked with hundreds or thousands of people. That's probably, I mean, some people have, but that's probably not likely. But a bunch of people with different constitutions, because if they haven't, they'll say like, oh, every time I get sick, I just eat raw garlic and it's amazing. And for a certain kind of person, that will be amazing. And for other kind of people, just chewing up raw garlic is going to be constitutionally aggravating to them
Mm-hmm.
because it's really kind of hot and acrid and dry and it'll fight their infection, but also irritate their tissues. But if that didn't happen to the person who wrote about it and they've never had any other experiences with any other people, they might not know about those potential aggravations, right? It's just off their map.
Goes back to connection.
Yeah, it goes back to that connection.
Okay, one maybe I hope this is a brief question. Why do you only, or answer to the question, why do you only capitalize plant names?
Oh, I've tried to not capitalize plant names anymore. Those are usually old handouts unless they're the first letter in a sentence.
Okay. Or like just capitalization in general,
The
maybe.
capitalization thing, where does that come from? The biggest thing that there's a few different causes here. I like the way the little J looks with the dot over it next to the little I with the dot over it, and there's the two dots. I just like the two dots there. Like a small J is just way cooler than a capital J because I get to put the dot and then the I next to it with the other dot is just pretty cool to me. So that's a huge part of it. There's also kind of a weird play on the fact that I love E. E. Cummings. However, E. E. Cummings did capitalize his name when he wrote it down. I've had people argue with me about that because you can see his signature. He clearly capitalized both E's, put periods, and then capitalized Cummings. But in his poetry, he always put like a little I. And a lot of his poetry has lowercase letters and not many capital letters, or capital letters in weird places. So I just kind of picked up that I like lowercase letters a lot. There's another aspect of it is that as much as I write, I can only type with these three fingers. And navigating the shift key it's just like extra work. Mostly it's just, I like it.
In my wondering about, I mean, not that I've allowed it to be a mystery to me for a long time. And that's why it's the last question here of like, what, there could be like some philosophical reason, but I like it is such a good, like,
it's mostly the double dots. I have to always be mindful, like when I'm typing, because of that, like, because I'm not good at typing, I often start off and don't put capitals in, and I might write other people's names down, and I'm like, oh, but they might want their name capitalized. Like they might prefer their name to be capitalized and not want it to be not capitalized. I have had some editors who, I don't have many editors because I just get to write whatever I want and publish it. But I have done some work where editors have insisted on capitalizing my name, or they're like, I remember this one person I talked to, and they're like, okay, listen, we'll, under the title where it says your name is, you're the author, we'll leave it lowercase, but we just can't have, like, if a sentence starts with Jim, have the sentence start with not a capital there. And I'm like, sure you can. All you have to do is capitalize it. Like, you can totally make it happen. I'm not going to fight about it. I mean, if someone capitalizes, I might get upset. It's not worth getting upset about. There's too many other things.
Okay. Well, I wonder.
I like the two little dots.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wonder if you prefer kind of lowercase. So when I like put this out, like keeping your name lowercase, if that's your preference.
You know, a great irony is that my handwriting has gotten so sloppy that if I ever mail a package to someone, it's almost all in capitals, because that is the way that I can write the most legibly.
Jim, thank you so much for your time. I maybe the coming home, if you could encapsulate your final words with like your experience of coming home to your own sense of humanity, your own healing, your own connection, your own awareness, whatever it is, like any final words in relationship to the home that you've created for your own full self.
I would maybe say that, and I'll stick to plants here because I'm an herbalist, but if you're into herbs and you're into plants or you're into mushrooms, and you learn about the plants that grow around you, and you don't necessarily have to know their Latin names. You can have your own, little pet names for them if you don't know what a plant is, but you recognize it, because that happens a lot. People will be like, oh, that plant grows, next all over, by my shed, but I don't know what it is. And I was like, well, you must know what it is because you recognize that. You just don't know what other people call it, right? So you can call it like shedweed. If you start paying attention to plants and to the stuff that grows around you, and then to shrubs and trees, the bigger ones, it will so deepen your connection to your sense of home and your sense of place, that it helps you to understand that you are a part of your habitat. You are a part of your ecosystem. And that is just like a really kind of like reassuring and empowering understanding to have, that any sense of separation you feel is only illusory, and that you're just as much as the deer and the rabbits and the squirrels or the porcupines or the iguanas, if you have iguanas, or those little animal lizards if you live in Florida that run around real fast on window screens. You're just like them. Yeah. Or banana slugs if you live in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, I am the banana slug. And the ducks that eat them. Lovely. Thank you so much for your time and your work and your writing and for putting yourself out there as a teacher. And I so appreciate your journey and your being.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye. Hello.